Hi, and welcome to MTG Friends. I'm Zach, and this is the first in a brand new line of videos for the channel. Focusing on exciting commander decks, I'll be doing deck techs for a variety of commanders, both classics and brand new ones. In this debut episode, we'll be focusing on a brand new commander, newly revealed just days ago, Anowon the Ruin Thief. He comes out in the Zendikar Rising commander deck, Sneak Attack. What I have for you today is a high-powered and fairly high-budget version of how I see this deck. While the budget may seem high, the cards included here are easily substituted for others in many cases that just results in the power dipping a small bit. Overall, I'm mostly using cards that I own, and so I wanted to show you my vision of this deck, and then offer suggestions on how to bring the budget down quickly, and without sacrificing too much power. Along the way, I'll even highlight some easy budget changes as the deck tech progresses. So, today I'll be covering the deck across a few important categories. First are the rogues of the deck, which are really important for Anowon himself. Next is the card draw, then the ramp, the reanimation, the equipment, the removal, and damage, and then the lands. These will cover the goals of the deck while giving you an overview of key cards and what they are there for. So, let's get started. First, let's have a look at our commander. Our commander is a legendary creature vampire rogue called Anowon the Ruin Thief, who you should see on screen now. He costs 2 blue and a black for a 2/4 that says, other rogues you control get +1/+1. Whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If the player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw a card. So this card immediately screams, play rogues, and it will be an efficient draw engine, which means we need to be playing a fairly low-cost deck while efficiently blowing through our deck and getting every advantage that we can. So what we're going to be looking for is low-cost rogues that are powerful and easy to use, lands that will draw us lots of cards, and ramp that will provide us lots of ways to cast the cards that we draw. One important thing about Anowon in the commander format, since you'll be playing against 3 players, if you hit 3 players with 3 different rogues and they each mill a creature, you're actually going to draw 3 cards off of that. So you're absolutely going to want cards in your deck that will allow you to use the cards in your deck. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started with our rogues group here. Overall, this group of rogues is going to cost you about $100 if you wanted to pick up every single one of them at their prices as they stand today. The first card is Bitter Blossom. This is a classic enchantment from the Lorwyn block. It costs 1 and a black for a tribal enchantment, Fairy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose a life and create a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. This is a pretty pricey card, coming in at almost $35, but I absolutely believe that this card is super important for this deck. This isn't really one of those cards that you can replace easily with another option, because what this card is doing is every single turn is providing you with another rogue for Anowon. So, if you do not have the budget to play Bitter Blossom, and I totally understand if you don't, go ahead and just cut this out and find yourself a nice, cool other rogue. One suggestion I would offer would be Ogre Slumlord, which is actually in the Sneak Attack precon that Anowon is included with. He does not make rogues, but is himself a rogue, but he does make 1/1 rats with Death Touch, which, I mean, personally, I think that's a fair enough substitute if you're not able to play this card. Next up, we're going to come to a brand new card out of Zendikar Rising, Black Bloom Rogue. This card on its front is a 3-mana human rogue as a 2/3 stats. He has Menace, and he gets +3/+0 as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. At 3 mana for a menacing 5/3, I think that's pretty efficient, but the most important part about this card is also that on its back, it is a black source that comes in tapped. While tap lands aren't exactly incredible and you don't want to play too many of them in a higher powered game, I think the flexibility of having a land and a 3-drop that can be a 5/3 with Menace is relatively valuable, and you want to hit those high damages to ensure you're milling a creature with Anowon. Next up, real easy, Blighted Agent. He's a 1/1 that's unblockable that also has Infect. Good card, and he's not expensive at all. Next up, we have a card from Throne of Eldraine, Brazen Borrower. He costs 1 blue for a fairy rogue. He has an adventure on him, an instant, that costs 1 and a blue that returns target permanent and opponent controls to their hand. And then he's a flash flyer that can only block flyers and is a 3/1 in stats. This card is another one of those ones that can very easily be substituted for just any other rogue, but I'm playing it because I have a copy. It's a 3/1 rogue with flying that can also be flashed out on an end step to surprise people, while also having the flexibility of being an instant that can bounce things. Next up, we have another really cheap card, Changeling Outcast. It is a 1-drop for a single black. It's a shapeshifter changeling, which means it does count as a rogue, and it can't block and can't be blocked as a 1/1. With Anowon out, this is a 2/2 that just straight up can't be blocked. Great card. Next up, we have one of the new cards out of Anowon's deck, Enigma Thief. Well, on its base, it is a 7-mana 5/5 with flying. It has Prowl, which allows it to be cast for only 4 mana, 3 and a blue. If you dealt combat damage to a player with a Sphinx or a Rogue, and when it enters, for each opponent, you get to bounce one target non-land permanent of theirs. I think this card is actually really great, a 4-mana 5/5 flyer that also has the Rogue subtype, thus becoming a 6/6 with Anowon out. With that lower alternate cost, is just very flexible and very powerful. Next up, we're going to have Frog Tosser Banneret, which is a mere 34 cents, back from the Lorwyn block. It is a Goblin Rogue, a 1/1 for 1 and a black. It has haste, and it says Goblin spells and Rogue spells you play cost 1 less to play. This card's just really important. It reduces the cost of your rogues. I don't really see any reason why you wouldn't play this card. It's super inexpensive, very easy to play, and very cheap as well. Next up, we have another new card from Zendikar, Glasspool Mimic. We talked about this one in our Zendikar set review, I suppose. It is a 2 and a blue, rather, for a Shapeshifter Rogue. It is a 0/0, but when it enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a Shapeshifter Rogue in addition to its other types. Additionally, on its backside, it is a tapped blue source. So this has a near infinite amount of flexibility, really. Any creature that you have on the battlefield that you would like to copy, you can copy with Glasspool Mimic. It remains a rogue, so it means it's going to be boosted with Anowon. And it even has 2 worse modes, where if you don't have anything to copy and you just want to land, you can play it down as a tapped blue source. And, hilariously, if you have Anowon out, you could just play this as a 1/1, so you can copy something. One important note is this cannot copy Anowon, as Anowon is a legendary creature, and that would require you to sacrifice one of them. Next up is a legendary creature. This is Gonti, Lord of Luxury. He costs 2 black for a legendary Aetherborn Rogue. He is at 2/3 with Death Touch, and when he enters, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down. Then, put the rest at the bottom of that library in a random order. You can look at that card and cast it as long as it remains exiled, and spend any mana of any type to cast it. Gonti's in here not necessarily as a connecting rogue, but more as just a very flexible way to steal some stuff off the top of an opponent's library. He combines really well against certain top-decking decks, lots of tutors that can put stuff on top of the deck if you can get him out. Also, it's just really nice to be able to drop a 4-drop 2/3 Death Touch that lets you steal 1 of 4 cards from an opponent. Very powerful card and absolutely worth the include, and he's a mere 68 cents, so absolutely worth playing. Next up, we have Keeper of Keys. This is probably the most expensive in terms of mana cost creature that I'm going to be playing in this deck, along with one other that I'll mention later. He costs 3 blue for a human rogue mutant, and he's a 4/4. When he enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you're the monarch, creatures you control can't be blocked this turn. This is a card that I included for a couple of reasons. 1, it's a rogue. 2, it brings the Monarch effect into Commander games, which is one of my absolute favorite effects that you can play in Commander. I just love having that aggression of having the Monarch going around and drawing extra cards. And finally, just making my creatures unblockable feeds right into Anowon's strategy and is guaranteeing I'm drawing additional cards. Next up, we have another simple one, Meringue River Prowler. He's a 2/1 for only 3 mana, 2 and a blue. He's a human rogue. He can't block, he can't be blocked, and you can cast him from your graveyard as long as you control a black or green permanent. We don't have any green permanents in here, but just having a black one's very simple, and having a recurable 2/1 rogue is very, very nice. Next up, another new card from Zendikar, Merfolk Windrobber. He's a 1/1 flyer for a blue. He's a Merfolk rogue. When he deals combat damage to a player, they mill a card, and you can sack him to draw a card later in the game, as long as somebody has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Next up, another new card from Zendikar Rising. This one's really easy, just a aggression rogue here. It is a 1+*3 For 1 black Vampire Rogue, he has Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink, and his power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. Since this deck does a lot of incidental milling, Nighthawk Scavenger can just get very large and out of control very quickly, gain you a lot of life, and just be a fairly dangerous creature. I mean, just in general. At the very base, it's a 1/3, but he can very quickly become as large as a 7 or 8/3, and when you have Anowon out, he gets even bigger. Next up is Notorious Throng. This is a sorcery for 3 and a blue. It says put X 1/1 black fairy rogue creature tokens into play with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. Seems pretty simple on its surface. While this card is pretty pricey, this is reprinted in the Sneak Attack Commander deck, so if you've picked that up in order to build this commander, you're going to have a copy of this. However, there is a twist on this card. It has a prowl cost that's actually higher than its base cost, 5 and a blue, and if you paid it, take an extra turn after this one. So this card's a really, really powerful and very flexible piece of creature creation and also a single extra turn. Next up is another easy one, Una's Blackguard. I believe this card is also seeing a reprint in Sneak Attack, but it's also only $1 and was recently reprinted in Jumpstart. This is 1 and a black for a Fairy Rogue 1/1 flyer. Each other rogue you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and when a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. So this makes your rogues really, really dangerous. You ideally will drop this turn 2. Every rogue you play after is going to get 1 bigger, and then you're going to start stripping cards out of your opponent's hand while you smack them as well. Next up is another fun one from Eldraine, Rankle, Master of Pranks. For 2 black, you get a legendary Fairy Rogue. He is a 3/3 with flying and haste, and when he deals combat damage to a player, you choose any number of the below. 1, each player discards a card. 2, each player loses 1 life and draws a card. Or 3, each player sacrifices a creature. If you're playing some of the token generators in this deck, you can absolutely make everybody sack a creature. Generally, the discard a card is very reasonable. That gets more cards into your graveyard for your rogue synergies, and the loses a life and draws a card is always very nice. This affects everyone as well, so you can potentially get a fairly large swing out of this if you do it right. Next up is Rootwater Thief. It is 1 and a blue for a Merfolk Rogue. When he's a 1/2, and you can pay a blue to give him flying until end of turn. When Rootwater Thief deals combat damage to a player, you can pay 2. If you do, search that player's library for a card and remove that card from the game, and then that player shuffles his or her library. The reason I've included this card is actually kind of a meta call, so this is very easily replaceable with something else if you don't think this is super helpful. But what this allows you to do is simply hit an opponent, and then strip an important combo piece or an important card just right out of their deck. No questions asked. I just think this card is absolutely spectacular and absolutely worth your include. Next up is a card that's a little pricier, Sakashima the Imposter. He's only $6, but this one's another just easily cuttable card. This one's actually in here for the flexibility of being a copy or a 3/1 rogue, and also the fact that he can bounce himself if you need to dodge some removal. One thing to note is when Sakashima becomes a copy of a creature, it does not remain a rogue unless the creature you're copying is already a rogue. But anyway, he says when he comes into play, you can choose a creature in play. If you do, he becomes into play as a copy of it, except it's still called Sakashima the Imposter, and it's still legendary. It also gains 2 blue, return Sakashima the Imposter to its owner's hand at end of turn. So this card's really flexible because generally you're going to want to copy something particularly great out of your deck. Rather, not your deck, but rather your field. This is really in here because it actually allows you to make a copy of Anowon. It retains its name of Sakashima the Imposter, and it retains its legendary status, so you can make copies of your legendary creatures and get their effects again, and it has the flexibility of being able to bounce itself back, if it survives until the end of turn. Next up, we have just another easy one. It's a 1-drop for a single blue, a Naga Rogue. It's called Slitherblade. It's a 1/2 that can't be blocked. Easy trigger. Next up is a new one from Zendikar Rising, Soaring Thoughts Thief, 1 and a blue, or rather blue and a black, for a human rogue. He's a 1/3 flash flying, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Rogues you control get +1/+0, and one or more rogues you control attack. Each opponent mills 2 cards. So, what's really great about this card is it has the potential of being a lord for your rogues, giving them +1/+0. It's very flexible with its flash, it has flying to be able to swing in, and it makes not all of your rogues, but anytime you attack with any number of rogues, every opponent is going to mill 2 cards. Please note this is only ever going to be 2 cards. It cannot be more than 2 cards because it's an attack trigger based not on the number of rogues, but that you attack with 1 at all. Next up, we have another nice and cheap card that's very powerful in the right deck. That being this deck, Stink Drinker Bandit. What a lovely name. He is a Goblin Rogue for 3 and a black, but he has Prowl for 1 and a black. So if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a Goblin or a Rogue, you can play him for 2. He is a 2/1. Whenever a rogue you control attacks and isn't blocked, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So while this won't help you against blockers, this will help you sneak extra damage in and mill more cards with Anowon's effect. Next up we have Thada Adel Acquisitor for 1 and 2 blue. Legendary creature Merfolk Rogue with Island Walk. He's a 2/2. And when he deals combat damage to a player, you can search their library for an artifact and exile it. They shuffle their library, and then you can play it. So you hit somebody with Thada Adel, and bam, you just stole their Soul Ring right out of their deck. You stole their Mana Crypt right out of their deck. Anything you want to grab out of there that is an artifact, you can absolutely steal. Note, you do need to have the colors of mana to be able to play it, but you also just have the flexibility of exiling it and just saying bye. Really, really powerful, really flexible card, and the Island Walk just makes it a little bit of sugar on top. Alright, next up we have a card out of M21 for a single black, Thieves Guild Enforcer. It's a 1/1 with Flash. Whenever it or another rogue enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 2. And as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their grave, it gets +2/+1 and has Death Touch. So a single mana for what becomes a 3/2 Death Touch that causes your rogues to mill opponents. I think this is fairly powerful, and the flexibility of having Flash to come in and assassinate something is also very, very strong. We have another new card out of Zendikar Rising next, Thieving Skydiver. For 1 and a blue, you get a Merfolk Rogue. It's a 2/1 with flying. It also has Kicker X, where your X cannot be 0. And when it enters, if it was kicked, gain control of an artifact with converted mana cost X or less. If it's an equipment, attach it to Thieving Skydiver. I really, really like this card because it has the ability, to pay 3 mana in total to come in and steal like a Soul Ring, a Mana Crypt, a Mana Vault. Any number of fairly decent mana rocks. You can pay more to grab bigger things. You can steal your opponent's important equipments and suddenly give your flying rogue that's a 2/1 already some big pumps because it auto-equips. This is just an absolute all-star in this deck, and if you can get a hold of one of these as Zendikar Rising comes out, I highly suggest it. We've got Triton Shorestalker next. He's another one of those unblockables. Just a single blue mana for a 1/1 Merfolk Rogue. Can't be blocked. Just easy chump damage with Anowon here. Next up is one that I decided to include, True Name Nemesis for 1 blue Merfolk Rogue. He's a 3/1, and when he enters, choose a player. True Name Nemesis has protection from the chosen player. Basically, this lets you pick a player and say, alright, I'm going to hit you with True Name Nemesis every single turn. This guarantees you're getting, 4 damage out if you have Anowon out. This is a really good way to kind of ensure some damage is going to get in, and really raise your chances of milling something. Our last rogue is Zareth San the Trickster, another new card out of Zendikar Rising. He costs 3 blue-black with Flash. He's a Merfolk Rogue, and he's a 4/4. He has an activated ability, 2 blue-black. Return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. Put Zareth San the Trickster from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. When he deals combat damage to a player, you can put target permanent from their graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That last effect is insane. You can steal lands, you can ramp yourself, you can grab anything that you've killed already. It doesn't care about the CMC, and Zareth San sneaks in so easily as well. This card's immensely powerful, and doesn't seem to be very expensive in terms of pre-orders, 77 cents, so I really suggest grabbing one. Next up, we're going to quickly go through our card draw. I'm not going to read every card out as, I guess in depth as I did here. First is Arch of Erazka. It's a land that lets you draw a card if you have the city's blessing. It taps for a colorless. Castle Lochthwain out of Eldraine is next. It enters untapped if you have a swamp. It can add black, and you can pay 1 black to draw a card, and then lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. This is just a card where if you've somehow run out of gas, maybe you're having trouble recovering, this just lets you sneak an extra card into your hand, and all you have to do is pay a bit of life. New card from Zendikar Rising, Confounding Conundrum next. This isn't really card draw, but it does draw you a single card on entering. But what this does do is stop opponents from ramping with their lands. It's just a little hate piece to slow people down. Next up is a fairly expensive card at $33 at the moment, a Demonic Tutor. Feel free to replace this with, honestly, pretty much anything. This card's really easy to replace, even from some of the less expensive tutors that can be up to 4 mana, or just a pet card that you really want to include. Maybe there's a rogue that I didn't talk about that you'd like to see here. It's really your choice. Demonic Tutor's just in here because I like having the flexibility of being able to go into my deck and hunt down a card that I want to play with. Next up, this one is a rogue, but it's really in here because of its card draw. This is Ghostly Pilferer. It is 1 and a blue for a Spirit Rogue, 2/1. When it becomes untapped, you can pay 2, and if you do, draw a card. When an opponent casts a spell from their anywhere other than their hand, you draw a card, and you can discard a card to make him unblockable. Another creature rogue we have here, but this one's also very big about drawing cards. This is Glint Sleeves Siphoner, 1 and a black for a 2/1 human rogue with Menace. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, gain an energy. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay 2 energy to draw a card and lose a life. Just a nice early game aggression piece that every 2 turns after your initial cast in is probably going to draw you a card. Kindred Discovery is next for 3 blue enchantment. When it enters, choose a creature type. When a creature you control of the chosen type enters or attacks, draw a card. This is just an insane draw engine, but this card is very expensive at nearly $30. Feel free to replace this with something as simple as a card like Coastal Piracy, Biden of Thassa. Really, this is just another way for me to include additional card draw. But if you don't want to pay that hefty price tag, feel free to replace it with some cheaper options that are going to be easier to get a hold of and will trigger on you dealing combat damage or attacking, but without the tribal aspect to it. Great card still, and I highly recommend it if you have one. Next up is another rogue, Looter Il-Kor. It is 1 and a blue for a core rogue, 1/1 with Shadow, which means it can only block or be blocked by creatures with Shadow. Realistically, most people do not have creatures with Shadow, so this is playing at near unblockable. And when it deals damage to an opponent, you can draw a card and then discard a card. This just gives you some card flexibility. This also does set up for some reanimation later if you so choose. Next up, another just simple one, Mystical Tutor, 1 blue, instant, search for an instant or sorcery, reveal it, put it on top after shuffling. Another helpful tutor, and it just lets me find answers if I need them. Another one is a classic, it's Necropotence. Skip your draw step whenever you discard a card, exile it instead, pay a life, exile a top card of your library face down, put it into your hand at the beginning of your next end step. This is here for draw. This is a powerful draw engine, probably the most powerful one in the history of Magic. If you do not want to pay that $24 price tag or higher, don't. I'm not going to force you to. Same with Mystical Tutor. That card is really spiked in value. But you can probably still pick up Mystical Tutors for fairly cheap if you know where to look. I remember picking up my copy for about $5, so I'm actually very surprised to see it all the way back up to $20. Either way, those are cards that are very easily replaceable. You could replace Mystical Tutor with something like a any of the oh my goodness, any of the wizards that search out artifacts. You could put in the I'm totally blanking on the name of it, but it's a card from Battle Bond that lets you search up low CMC cards. Necropotence can be replaced with other just small recovery cards. Realistically, these are cards that, well, power up the deck. Not having them doesn't exactly make the deck weaker. It just means that your draws, or maybe you're not tutoring. And that's more than okay. Feel free to replace it with other powerful draw spells that you have that don't cost a bajillion dollars. Or just other rogues that you really want to hit people in the face with. Always an option. Next up, Notion Thief. This is another rogue that's being included in card draw due to its power as card draw rather than as an attacker. It is 2 blue-black for a human rogue, 3/1 with Flash. If an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one he or she draws in each of his or her draw steps, instead that player skips the draw and you draw it instead. It's a very dangerous hate piece. Really hurts anybody else that's trying to draw cards. And all around is just a card that you want to have in your deck. Somebody goes to cast a huge draw card. You know, somebody does a Blue Sun Zenith, or heck, like the new Seagate restoration that we've been talking about on the channel. And you flash in a Notion Thief, you're going to be drawing a ton of cards, and they get nothing. Really powerful card. Next up is another less easily replaceable just off of power, but the deck can absolutely function without it. This is Rhystic Study. This is a classic. It's $24. Well, it just got a reprint in Jumpstart. This card has retained a lot of its value, and so if you don't have one, feel free to skip it. Absolutely just put in another powerful rogue that you want to play with, put in another counter spell, put in another removal spell, some more ramp. You can absolutely skip that one. Next up is a great tutor out of M20 Scheming Symmetry. For a single black, you choose 2 target players. Each of them searches their library for a card, shuffles, and puts it on top. What's really powerful about this card is it plays a mind game with your opponent, because you can let them tutor something, but then you've got rogues sitting there ready to mill whatever that is right off the top of their deck, and if they don't play their cards right, or their game right, they're not going to get their card. So I think this card's really great because you're getting a tutor off of it for a single black mana, and you have the ability to remove whatever it is that they try to tutor. Next up is the aforementioned Seagate Restoration. This is a bolt land, as we've been calling them, because the front side, while it is a sorcery, the back side is a blue mana source, a land that can come in untapped if you pay 3 life. The front costs 4 blue, 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 and lets you draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. What I think is really nice about this card is that maximum hand size rider more than almost anything else. This deck is drawing a ton of cards. So having a card like this lets you not just refill your hand, but absolutely blow your hand wide open and lets you draw a ridiculous amount of cards if you've set yourself up right, while also having the flexibility of being a land when you need it. Next up is our final rogue of the day, I believe, and that is Sig, River Cutthroat. For a flexible blue-black or blue-black, well, blue-black, which means you can pay Dimir, so either or. For a legendary Merfolk Rogue, he's a 1/3 that says at the end of a turn, if an opponent has lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw a card. Please note this is not the end of your turn, but the end of any turn. So if somebody just plays a Bolt land, they are getting, well, their land, and you're getting a card off of it. This has the potential of drawing up to 4 cards on the go-around, and while it looks hefty at $13, I believe this is also included in the Sneak Attack Precon, so I really recommend picking that up if you'd like to build this deck. Our final card in our card draw is Vanquisher's Banner. This is a tribal piece from Ixalan. It's an artifact for 5 generic mana. When it enters, choose a creature type. All of those creatures get +1/+1, and whenever you cast one of those, draw a card. It's just an efficient pump effect and lets you draw cards whenever you play your rogues, which just lets you keep cycling through your deck at a nice hefty pace. Alright, next up we're going to talk about our ramp options in the deck. While I only have 8 pieces of ramp here, you can absolutely flex and go way more. Also, most pieces of ramp in this deck are very flexible. If you do not want to pay $91, which is the cost for a Mana Crypt right now, just put in something else. You can absolutely play a Gilded Lotus, you could play a Hedron Archive, you could play something lower to the ground like a Mind Stone. You've got a lot of options here, and I am once again just playing with the cards that I have and what I really recommend to get this deck to a super high power level. So anyway, here's what we're going to talk about. We got Arcane Signet. This is in Sneak Attack. You're going to have one if you bought this deck. It's 2 mana, add a mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Next up is Dimir Signet, 2 mana, 1 tap, add blue-black, also in Sneak Attack. Herald's Horn. This one's a little pricey, but thanks to an uncommon shift in Jumpstart, this is a little more available now. For 3 mana, when it enters, choose a creature type. Creatures spells that you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get to peek at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the type you chose, you may reveal it and put it to your hand. So this is both draw and like sort of ramp, but I chose to include it in the ramp because of that cost reduction. Next up, we have the aforementioned Mana Crypt. If you can't afford it, I named some suggestions to put in there. No shame in doing so. This card is super expensive, and I only was able to snag a copy because of that reprint in Double Masters that dipped the price just low enough for me to pull the trigger. This card is absolutely incredible, but if you do not want to pay to get one, just don't. There's no reason to. Next up is Soul Ring. This card's price is displaying way higher than it actually is because Architect has chosen a pre-order one from Commander Collection Green. However, this card is included in Sneak Attack, and it is a staple of every Commander deck ever. I can think of very few decks that do not want to run this. Play Soul Ring, kids. Next up is Sword of the Animist. For 2 mana, you get a legendary equipment that equips for, I believe, 2 mana. The equipped creature gets +1/+1, and when it attacks, you can search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. It's just a very efficient piece of ramp, buffs your creature a little bit, and it only costs 4 mana to get it onto something, and then you're getting a repeatable effect. I really like this card. Next up is Talisman of Dominance. This costs 2 mana for an artifact. It taps to add a colorless, or taps to add a blue or a black, but if you do that one, you take a damage. This card is also just very easily replaceable with a different piece of ramp. You can use one of the Dimir Lockets, Dimir Keystone. You've got a lot of options. This is just the cheaper mana cost of them. And last but not least, I have included Thought Vessel. This is 2 mana for an artifact that gives you no maximum hand size and taps for a colorless. This is really in here for the no maximum hand size while also being a 2 mana rock, but Mind Stone fills a similar role. Alright, next we're going to dig into the reanimation category. There's only 4 cards in here, but all of them, except for I suppose the last one, is a little expensive but not too crazy. The first one is a brand new card, Agadim's Awakening out of Zendikar Rising. It is a sorcery for X black black black. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that have a different converted mana cost, X or less. This has a ton of flexibility, and on the backside is another Bolt land, this one creating a black mana source as a land. If you can get a hold of this, I highly recommend it. I think this card is absolutely incredible, not just because of its sorcery side, but also due to the sheer power of it being an untapped, potentially, land. Next up is Animate Dead. For 1 and a black, you get an aura that lets you enchant a creature in a graveyard, and then essentially put it onto the battlefield enchanted with this that now enchants it, and the enchanted creature gets -1/-0. This is just really strong because it lets you enchant anything in any creature in any graveyard, not just your own, so you can steal some good stuff out of a graveyard and bring it back with just a slight power dip for only 2 mana. Next up is Reanimate. This one's a classic. Same thing as Animate Dead, where you can steal something out of any graveyard. It costs a single black mana for the sorcery, and the only cost is that you lose life equal to whatever you've taken's converted mana cost. This just got a reprint in Jumpstart, so I expect to see the price on this one trending down. It's currently at about $7. Last but not least is the Scarab God. While still a little hefty on the price tag, if you have one of these, I highly recommend it. It is a legendary god for 3 blue-black. It is a 5/5, and at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life, and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. We're not so worried about the scrying and losing life piece here, but it's just a nice extra bit of flavor. And if you've started reanimating stuff, sure, you're going to get a couple life and a couple scries off of this. But the real meat of this card is its activated ability. For 2 blue-black, you can exile a creature in a graveyard. You create a token copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. Crazy powerful, and while you're probably not going to be reanimating your own stuff because they will not be rogues, you're going to want to steal all that stuff that you're milling out of your opponent's decks because of your rogues. Additionally, the Scarab God has built-in protection. When it dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So strong and really hard to get rid of as well. And all of those tokens are just going to be wildly, wildly dangerous. Alright, our next category is our equipment. A couple of these are pretty cheap, but I've got 2 hefty boys in here. So if you don't want to play those, please replace them with pretty much any other equipment you could ever imagine. Something as simple as a Lightning Greaves could go a long way in here. It's going to be your call, but I've included these because I have them, and they're really, really helpful in this deck. So the first one is actually included in the precon. It is Bone Horde for 4 generic mana. It has Living Weapon, which means when it enters, you create a 0/0 black germ that Bone Horde is attached to. The equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards, and it only equips for 2. So pretty much you put this on one of your unblockable dudes as fast as humanly possible, and then start smacking people in the face for a ridiculous amount of damage, and because you're milling when Anowon is out based on the amount of damage you dealt, your creature's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And they have to spend removal on the artifact rather than on the creature. This card is crazy, and I highly recommend playing it. Next up is Skull Clamp. We're making a couple small tokens here, and we got some small dudes where if we really need to cash them in, we can cash them into Skull Clamp. Just a single mana to play it, single mana to equip it. Creature gets +1/-1. When it dies, draw 2 cards. It's just a nice little draw engine. We're going to talk about Whisper Silk Cloak next. It is 3 generic and equips for 2, but the equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. What's fun about this is you can go ahead and throw other equipments on that creature first and then put your cloak on it in order to make sure they're suited up and really hard to get rid of. But once you have this on your creature, you cannot target other equipments onto it, so please be aware of that when you're using Whisper Silk Cloak. I know Shroud is a popular keyword thanks to Lightning Greaves and Commander, but it's still something to make note of. However, I am choosing to play this card over Lightning Greaves because of the Can't Be Blocked rider that's on Whisper Silk Cloak here. I just think that's really important for a deck that really cares about sneak and combat damage through. The two beefy boys in terms of cost here are Sword of Sinew and Steel out of Modern Horizons. It is a 3-mana artifact equipment that equips for 2. The creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and red, and when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you can destroy up to 1 target Planeswalker and 1 target artifact. What's nice is that the Planeswalker and artifact do not have to be controlled by the person that you dealt damage to. Next up is the really expensive one, Sword of Feast and Famine. For 3 generic and 2 to equip. It's an equipment that says equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from black and green. When the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and you untap all lands you control. This is in here for one reason and one reason alone, and it's the untap all lands you control rider. Black and blue don't usually get the ability to untap your lands, really, ever, actually. Blue can when green is attached, but we don't have green here. And this lets us use the cards that we are probably drawing off of Anowon. Really, really powerful card, and it deserves that $40 price tag, but if you don't have it, please replace it with just another useful equipment, or maybe another rogue, fill out that deck list a little bit more. Alright, we're almost done now. We're going to talk about our removal suite next. There's some expensive cards in here, though, so please feel free to skip them if you do not want to play them. Our first one is at $22. I understand this is expensive, but this is Blood Chief Ascension. For a single black mana, you get an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent has lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on the Ascension. Whenever a card is put into opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Blood Chief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life, and if you do, you gain 2 life. This is just a really, really efficient damage piece, which is why it's in the removal and damage category. So if you have the ability to, get this card, absolutely play it, because it's going to very, very, very quickly rack up the requisite 3 quest counters, and then start turning your mill into some serious, serious damage. Alright, next up we're going to look at Counterspell. This is a classic, you can grab this for very cheap, and it's 2 blue, instant to counter a spell. Why would you not play this card? Next up is Cyclonic Rift. This one's a little pricey, but it did get a nice rare reprint in Double Masters, so the price has really gone down a little bit. Grab one if you'd like to play one. It costs 1 and a blue for an instant. It returns target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, but you can overload it for 6 and a blue to return every single non-land permanent everyone but you controls. This card is immensely powerful, which is absolutely why it's so expensive. It's considered a commander staple if you're playing blue. However, this can very easily be replaced with a card like Into the Royal, which is just 2 mana for an instant that returns something to the hand and can be kicked to draw a card. There's a lot of flexible other choices, but nothing's quite as powerful as a card like Cyclonic Rift. If you're looking for the same level of like mass bounce or mass destruction, look into blue's cards like Whelming Wave, that while it affects you as well, can still reset the board. Next up is Deadly Rollick out of this year's Commander decks that were in based around Ikoria. This is a potentially free exile effect if you control your commander. Additionally, we have Fierce Guardianship in here, also from that same cycle of cards that is a free non-creature counterspell if you control your commander. These are both just really powerful and are almost immediately staples if you're playing those colors, so I really highly recommend playing these if you've got them, and if you don't, just replace them with some good removal and some counter spells. Next up is another easy one, Drown in the Loch. For a blue and a black, it's an instant where you choose one, counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in a controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in the controller's graveyard. Just a great card, and we're going to be milling a lot of cards, so we want to play this. The remaining couple of cards here are Narset's Reversal, which for 2 blue is an instant, copies target instant or sorcery, and then returns that instant or sorcery to its owner's hand, and then you get control of that copy. So it's almost like a soft counter where you get to steal their spell. And then Swan Song, for a single blue, just counters an enchantment, instant, or sorcery and gives them a bird. It's just very low cost, so it's very easy to use. And last in our removal, we have Toxic Deluge. For 2 and a black. It's a sorcerer. You can pay any amount of life, and all creatures get -X, -X until end of turn. Alright, and last in our card list is just a quick overview of our lands here. I've used pretty much every available blue and black dual land that I personally have a copy of. So some of the really expensive ones, I also do not have the blue-black fetch land, so I have not included that here. But I have some easy ones like Ancient Tomb. This card's pretty pricey, so don't play it if you don't want to play it. Simple as that. Slot in just another basic. Basics are very powerful, and you're running Sword of the Animist, so you want them. Bajuka Bog here is in case you need to exile someone's graveyard, which is actually very reasonable because your rogues that trigger off 8 or more in the graveyard just care about one player having that rather than all of them. Some people play graveyard decks in Commander, and so you don't want to be enabling them with Anowon. You want to get rid of their graveyard when you're ready to do so. Castle Vantress is in here next. It's just a land that allows you to scry with some excess mana. Next one up is the new modal dual-faced land from Zendikar Rising that can be an untapped blue or an untapped black. It's your choice. Dark Slick Shores is next, which just enters tapped unless you control 2 or fewer. This is a fast land, and this one's also really kind of like a meta choice. If you don't want to play a card that risks being a tap land later in the game, don't, but I'm usually willing to take that risk. This one's really kind of an optional card, especially because it's a little pricey. Darkwater Catacomb is next. This one's super cheap. It is a double land in a sense. You pay a single mana into it of any color that you have, even a colorless, and then you get a blue and a black back out of it. Next up is Emergent Zone. I just really like this card. It allows you to go off at instant speed. Homeward Path is next in order to stop people from stealing my crap. Don't touch my stuff. And so I have Homeward Path in here. I'm running 6 islands and 5 swamps in here based on the color pips that my deck presents. Morphic Pool is next. This is the, they're calling them crowd lands now. It basically enters untapped if you have 2 or more opponents, and it taps for a blue or a black. Rogue's Passage is next. This is a way to guarantee cards that I need to connect will connect. Scavenger Grounds is next. This is just another way to exile cards out of a graveyard, but this is more the, like, nuclear option. You pay 2 and sacrifice Scavenger Grounds, because we don't have any other deserts in here. Exile all cards from all graveyards. If we really, really, really need to get rid of all graveyards, Scavenger Grounds is the way to go here. Shelldock Isle is next. This is a hideaway land, so it enters tapped, but you get to peek at the top 4 cards of your library and choose one and exile it under Shelldock Isle. You can play it without paying its mana cost if a library has 20 or fewer cards in it, and I feel like with this deck, that's actually not that hard to hit. Shizo, Death's Storehouse, is next. This is a legendary land that enters untapped, adding black. And you can pay a black and tap it to give a legendary creature fear until end of turn, which means that that creature cannot be blocked except for by a creature that shares a color with it, or an artifact creature, if I remember correctly. It might just be if a black can't be blocked by a black creature. Alright, next up we have Strip Mine. This is very easily replaceable by cards like Ghost Quarter. If you don't want to play the expensive version, don't. Thanks for watching. Now, next up we have Sunken Ruins. This was very recently reprinted in Double Masters, so the price has come down a significant amount. But it comes in untapped, can be tapped to add a colorless, and then you can pay a 1 of 2 manas, a blue or a black, to tap it and add blue-blue, blue-black, or black-black, your choice. Tainted Isle is next, which can be tapped to either add colorless or a blue and a black, but only if you have a swamp. Underground River is a pain land, so you can tap it for 1 of the 2 colors if you pay a life. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth makes all your lands also function, well, actually all lands function as swamps, and then Watery Grave is the shock land. Like I said, this mana base can be a little pricey, but I'm not going like too crazy on the mana here. There's some very easily swappable cards out, and 90% of the time you're going to put in like a tap land or an island or something. Alright, and very lastly here, now that we've gone through all of the cards that are included in this deck, we're going to take a quick overview of what this deck wants to do, and then I'm going to show you a sample hand and do a really quick goldfish of this deck. Very simply, this deck wants to swarm out rogues, get Anowon onto the battlefield, and then start swinging. It's going to be very aggressive. You want to hit people hard, mill lots of cards, and you're not really aiming to win off the mill. You are very much aiming to win off of damage. Every other card in your deck is really here to support that, with reanimation targets to steal the best stuff that you mill. deal lots of damage by swinging in, and draw an absolutely ridiculous amount of cards. Key cards in here are going to be cards like Soaring Thought Thief, which are going to boost up your cards. You're really going to like Una's Blackguard for the boost as well. Zareth's Sand is going to be really great for grabbing stuff out of graveyards. Bitter Blossom is a huge element here, giving you a essentially 2/2 rogue every single turn with flying. And you're also really going to love cards like Frog Tosser Banneret. Even Enigma Thief is really great here just due to that bounce effect and being a fairly large rogue. Other really important cards are some of the card draw over here, cards like Sig, cards like Ghostly Pilferer, and you're also going to love cards like Bloodchief Ascension if you're willing to pay the dollars for that. Additionally, your ramp package is going to be real solid, but Scarab God is going to be another big MVP with your reanimation. And last but not least, I think all 5 of these pieces of equipment here are just really excellent cards, and I highly recommend playing them. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's take a quick look at what an opening hand for this deck could potentially look like. Here we go. Alright, we are looking at what I would call a completely unplayable hand. Gotta love it. Alright, here's a little more playable of a hand. We got 3 lands, and we got some very playable early cards here. So I think we're going to start out as if we were on the play here. We're going to play an untapped Watery Grave, shocking ourselves for 2. Tap it and play a Slitherblade. Next turn, we're going to untap. We are going to play an Arch of Orazca and tap 2 mana to play our Frog Tosser Banneret. We can then go ahead and swing in for 2 damage. We're going to untap and draw, and we're going to play an untapped Swamp next. Alright, so here's where things can get really entertaining. We can play our Anowon already, thanks to Frog Tosser Banneret, so we are going to go ahead and do that. Now, we're going to go ahead and swing in for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 damage, and we're going to be attacking 2 different opponents, hypothetically. So each of those opponents would mill 2 cards, and we could hit up to 2 draws off of that. Alright, we're going to move to our next turn, untap and draw. We're going to play a tapped Bojuka Bog, just exiling whomever's graveyard we want. Now, we've got some pretty good options here. We could drop something like Rankle right now, but I really think that the correct move here is going to be tapping for a black, playing a Changeling Outcast, and then also dropping our Thieves Guild Enforcer. This will probably enter on an opponent's turn, but if we play it first, we can actually mill 4 cards by having it enter and the Changeling Outcast enter. Now, if we move to combat, we could attack all 3 opponents, hypothetically, with all 3 of these cards, and even have the power to draw 1, 2, 3 cards. We still have a land drop this turn. We can play that island, and then we can tap the Arch of Orazca to put Soul Ring out. And then, we actually have the flexibility to play our Ghostly Pilferer for only a single blue if we want, or we could drop our Sword of the Animist. What I think we're going to do here is Soul Ring to play Sword, Island to play the Pilferer due to the cost reduction on the Pilferer because of Frog Tosser Banneret. So we're only a couple turns in. We've dealt a good bunch of damage to our opponents. We've milled them out for, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. About 12 cards around the board here. We've drawn 4 or 5 cards already, and we've got a pretty nice board presence already. So if we move to our next turn, we draw for the turn, and we're kind of ready to put some serious damage out here. We can drop Bojuka Bog on the Arch of Orazca to put Rankle out for only 3, and then we can also tap that to put out our Glint Sleeve Siphoner. Now, we still have 3 mana up. We can't play Thada Adel or Notion Thief because we do not have the colors to do so, but we can tap the Soul Ring to put our Sword of the Animist on Slitherblade and guarantee ourselves a land here. And then when we move to combat, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 creatures that we can attack with, as well as an energy hanging out in here with the Siphoner. So we have 7 creatures. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 damage that we can swing across. We have these effects on Rankle. We're getting a land off of it. And later, when this becomes untapped on our next untap step, we can even tap that Soul Ring to draw an additional card. I think we have an absolutely crazy board state after just a couple of turns, obviously without any interaction from our opponents, because we don't have any real opponents right now, but this should really just show you what kind of board state you should be looking to get. It looks like our next draw was Seagate Restoration, which is unfortunately a card that we couldn't play right now, but we can actually flip it and make Seagate Reborn coming in untapped, paying 3 life. This is going to give us some more flexibility with our blue. We can actually just use it to play Thada Adel right here. And then we can hold up Notion Thief and Drown in the Loch. Swing in a whole bunch of damage again. We'll say we tapped Ghostly Pilferer there just to have Enigma Thieves. Ooh, that was actually a really great draw. Probably would have changed how I'd done things, but I also would have had an additional island because of the Sword of the Animist. I just forgot to go grab it. Remember your triggers. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what kind of aggression you're going to be looking forward to. Unlike normal mill decks, this deck is not a deck that's all about leveraging its mill through cards that say mill 8 cards, mill half your library, mill 20 cards. This deck is an aggressive blue-black creature-focused deck where you are throwing out cards, blowing the board wide open through a number of powerful creatures, giving yourself lots of powerful effects off of it, and drawing about as many cards as you possibly can off of Anowon. There's what our next couple of draws would have looked like here. We could have gotten Enigma Thief out. We even have the mana to Cyclonic Rift somebody, which has the potential of just killing somebody outright, especially with cards like Thieves Guild Enforcer getting bigger, Rankle letting us draw cards, Ghostly Pilferer letting us draw cards, and Anowon also letting us draw cards, and then getting Thada Adel in to steal people's mana rocks. So this deck ramps pretty efficiently, is super aggressive, and you should play it as such, and also has the backup of cards like Drown in the Loch and Notion Thief to stop your opponents from really stopping you, I guess. So, thank you so very much for watching this deck tech for Anowon the Ruin Thief. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave us a like and a comment if you have something to say. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to be a friend of the gathering, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching. I've been Zach, and hope you enjoyed.